Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amanda Potter. I'm the educator for public and university programs here at the Wexner Center. Before I introduce our guest today, I just wanted to quickly mention another upcoming program. April 8th, we will welcome Hassan Hajjaj, the Moroccan artist whose video installation, My Experimental Rock Stars, Volume 1, is also on view in our galleries, so I hope you can come back and join us for that as well. On to today. Beryl Korot is a pioneering multimedia artist whose work, Text and Commentary, is a linchpin of the current exhibition, Fiber Sculpture 1960 to Present. Presenting weaving and video making as parallel activities, Text and Commentary posits that the loom was, and I'm quoting here, the first computer on Earth in that it programs pattern. And it was one of the first works ever to integrate video art into an installation setting. Korot was the co-editor and co-founder of Radical Software, the first publication to discuss the possibilities of video, which began in 1970, and she co-edited the anthology Video Art with Ira Schneider in 1976. Stretching the boundaries of video again in 1989, she began collaborating with her husband, the composer Steve Reich, on two video operas, The Cave, 1993, and Three Tales from 2002, which were both included in major performance festivals around the world. A major retrospective, Beryl Korot, Text, Weave, Line, Video, 1977 to 2010, premiered at the Aldrich Museum of Contemporary Art in 2010, and her works have also been included in many international exhibitions, including Documenta and the Whitney and Sao Paulo Biennials, and she's also a Guggenheim Fellow. Please join me in welcoming Beryl.
Hi. So I don't know how many of you saw the installation upstairs, but that installation was made about 10 years after the Sony Portapak came out in 1967, which was really a revolutionary tool and the beginning of the field of video art. One of the things that excited people at the time, especially filmmakers and artists in general, was the fact that the Sony Portapak was relatively portable, which meant it was only 40 pounds. We kind of walked around with it as if it really was portable, but when I pick it up, I still have one in my studio. It's shocking to me that we did that. It had sync sound, which for filmmakers was completely revolutionary. It had recyclable tape, which was amazing. It had open feedback, so that people could view themselves, and you know that a lot of early video work was people viewing themselves. It was also sculptural in the sense that you could take these little television boxes and put them around a room and stretch time and have time play against itself. I was very interested actually in the multiple channel work in that it took people out of the living room and brought them into a public space to look at video art, which was a completely new concept. You had revolutionary in that it brought entertainment and news into the living room, and people would sit around and watch the set as a kind of family event, actually. And then in '67, with the Portapak, you kind of turned that on its head, because with all the ideas that were going on in the '60s, people were beginning to think that they were getting tired of the fact that broadcast television was a one-way communication system from the broadcasters to the people at home, and that with this Portapak, you could begin to generate your own information, that you could form little groups of people chipping in to buy equipment and kind of decentralize the system, give access to people. Many of the things that we think about today in terms of the personal computer, but at that time, it was incredibly new types of thinking. And I got involved with a group of people called Rain Dance, which was a kind of play on words of the Rand Corporation at the time, which was kind of looking into the industrial military complex. So to have a Rain Dance Corporation was quite different. And its concern was to begin thinking about what we called media ecology, which was the relationship of human beings to the information environment in which they lived. And that's a very different idea from what later became the information highway with the computer technology, which became more of a delivery system. And the media ecology concept was more thinking about actually the impact of media on human beings, which is something I think is coming more now. There's a guy, Jaron Lanier, who invented virtual reality, and he's writing a lot on the impact of this kind of technology on us as human beings. Anyway, I found myself in the late 60s with another woman creating a journal on this new art form and community activist form that was beginning, called Radical Software. And Radical Software essentially sent letters to people anywhere that we knew they existed, and said, we're starting a journal, and if you'd like to contribute, please send us something about what you're doing. And so the first issue of Radical Software, which was about access to the information and the decentralization of the information, people wrote to us and wrote about the paperless society, about the potential of cable television, all of these things, which were a challenge to broadcasting at that time. And I did that for a number of years. We did some really interesting experiments with a publication in and of itself, in that at a certain point, those of us who were working on the paper were all artists, and none of us really wanted to become print editors, especially since we were surrounded with this new medium. So we had an idea to farm out issues of the magazine to, we had, at that time, we had a publisher, and we asked him if it would be okay, rather than our continuing to do each issue that we had obligated ourselves to do, if we could farm out these issues to different people throughout the country. And that's what we did for the second volume. And when I think about it now, it's kind of almost having given people individual websites at that point to begin to talk about what they were doing, and not just what Rain Dance was thinking that was interesting, or personal feedback from other people. It was an interesting experiment, and when it was done, we all decided we'd had enough. This was as far as we wanted to go with the publication, and it came to an end in 1974. When I was working on it towards the end in 1974, I had the closest thing I've ever had in my life to an epiphany, which was that the loom, the hand loom, which I had become interested in through a friend as an early computer, the first computer on Earth, in that it programs pattern according to a numerical structure, that print medium encodes information in lines, loom encodes information in lines, and that video was encoding information in lines. And this said to me that there was something, since these were all communications technologies, that there was something about the human mind that wanted to organize information this way. And I just sat on that for a while. I notated patterns. I picked up the camera for the first time, and I played around, and that idea of this linear structuring of information across this ancient to the modern technology sat there. Okay, so October 1974. Excuse me, I'm going to look for a little water bottle. Okay, great, it's right here. I was invited to go to Berlin to visit a friend of mine. And at that time, it's hard to imagine now, but the Holocaust wasn't really something that was talked about either by the Germans or by survivors. But it sat as this unspoken thing out there in the world. So if you were going to Germany for the first time and you had heard about the Holocaust kind of remotely or from family members, you knew it was this big thing. And so when I was invited to go to Berlin as a young Jewish woman, I thought, I'll go and I'll be interested to be part of the art world there. Berlin itself, of course, at that time was completely isolated from the rest of West Germany. And I said, but I'll come, but I'll have to make a visit to Dachau. That's what I did. I went to Germany, and then I decided, okay, I'm going to go to Dachau and just pay my respects and acknowledge that that's here and just do that. So I drove down to Dachau from Berlin, and when I got there, what I found was a tourist camp. This was 1974. It was a place where tourists were coming, and it was kind of the whitewashed, spiffed up barracks that were left over from the war. And, very mundane, very white, long gravel pathways and cleaned up crematoria. And I decided to go back and to record the tourists moving through the space the next day. When I got back to New York and looked at what I had shot, I was struck at how everything was so deadpan on pretty much completely tripod shot, with just tourists moving through the space. And I thought to myself, how am I going to breathe life into these images? And what occurred to me was that if I thought, multiple channel work, as I mentioned, was the most interesting for me because it was truly radical in that you were taking people out of their living room. So right away I knew I was going to work multiple channel. But what did multiple channel have to do with the hand loom? Well, you could look at each of the different monitors as a single thread and think, everyone was talking about programming the monitors. Well, okay, so I'll program these monitors of 4 as if it was threads on a loom. So channels 1 and 3 and 2 and 4 kind of formed, which is a basic, it's the basic, what they call tabby, that binds a fabric. And I thought, okay, I'm going to use that as a basic narrative structure throughout the work. And that 1 and 3 and 2 and 4 will move the viewer through the space from the outside of the camp to the inside of the camp. And, excuse me. This screensaver I have up here actually is I'm at a college actually showing the work, which was all edited on reel-to-reel equipment with a grease pencil and a stopwatch. And let me go to, this was the very first installation of Dachau at the Kitchen in New York City. This is the installation this past year at the Tate. Very, very similar, except that this, you'll notice on the wall itself, there are kind of these little vertical and horizontal lines because we couldn't afford plywood at the time. There was no budget for that. So a friend of mine went out and we bought foam core and kind of stuck up this wall, took a mat knife, punched the holes in it, and attached it by tape to the wall behind. And it actually held up for the 3 weeks and looked pretty good. This was a diagram that was made in the editing of the work, in that this is one channel, this is the third channel, this is the second and the fourth. And you'll see the outside of the camp on 1 and 3 and the inside on 2 and 4. And through a shift, you're taken through the entire camp until you're at the crematoria and then the water that flows through it. This is kind of the structure of the video itself. And I do have a little clip from the video where I brought the, can't find my mouse here. Isn't this coming up? Okay. Excuse me. Right. Desktop. Okay, I'm going to I'll scroll through this work so you know a little bit about what I'm talking about. just going to scroll through this work. It's a long work, and it really needs to be looked at from beginning to end, and we certainly don't have the time. And besides, this is just four channels that I streamed in a very funky way into the computer, so you get a sense of what it is. But all right, so you have, the outside and the inside of the camp juxtaposition, and finally you have two of the channels switching to the guard tower. There's always a guard tower in this work in view, pretty much. And you have a rhythm for all the channels, and it goes to the barracks outside, to the barracks inside, with tourists murmuring and moving through the space. And then towards the end, you get tourists walking across a bridge to the crematorias. They're kind of, in a way, I structured it so they're tracing a path that an inmate might have. Just a few comments on the sound. Outside the crematoria, you heard a woman laughing. That's because she was playing with her child. It was that kind of thing. And there was a nunnery next door that happened to go off. This is actually all sync sound when I was in the crematoria. And then there was a kind of, I think, a filled-in trench, I'm not really sure, that had water going through it with barbed wire over it. Very pastoral scene, and that's kind of how the work ends. Oops. When I finished Dachau, I really had this need for making something by hand for the camera. I've always had kind of back and forth in working with technology to want to have more hand in the whole process. When I did Dachau, I mean, part of the hand was that you were working with a grease pencil and a stopwatch, and you could measure time physically, you know, from one spot to another on the tape deck of 2 seconds. So you would mark and you would figure out where to put your edits in and how long things would be. That was very satisfying to me. When I decided to do the next work, which was the work upstairs, I actually had a loom at that point. I bought a loom and made the work with a camera hanging from the ceiling, and kind of wove and recorded at the same time, essentially hand making the work that the viewer would see. So I guess, let me find that. And the piece upstairs is, in a sense, a dialogue between, again, more ancient and more modern technology. So you have the weaver's notation, 5 of them, facing the weavings themselves facing the monitors. And then on the side walls, you have pictograms which is a video score of the work, which kind of goes back to ancient languages. And you also have the loom notation, which is an actual visual score of the weavings themselves. And it kind of gives directions to both the hands and the feet of how you make pattern. So it was, again, pushing me in a direction out of video at the same time while I was working with video. And that, in turn, led to, and I'll just show a few little, you've seen the score, so this is one score upstairs. When I was making this work, I essentially made a lot of little 3x5 cards. Why is that so small? Yeah. Which I sat in front of all the material that I had recorded. I drew what I was looking at, and then I threw these things around on the floor and began to organize them. And then when I finished organizing them, in a similar way to Dachau, with channels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so a minute, 2 minutes, where you have similar material on 1, 3, and 5, but always going at a different time, to also, again, create a kind of narrative, a nonverbal narrative of the work based on weaving structures and not literary structures, which to me was a huge thing. In a way, in the back of my mind was what moving from an oral culture is to moving to a literary culture, to moving to a culture based on the written word. And the loom definitely existed at a time before the written word. But the fact that things were made up of lines and that lines were organized over a period of time to create a pattern, meaning almost like the narrative of those lines, was to me, and it still is to me, something extremely rich and informative of, again, that this is not arbitrary, and that how the information from now through the computer is organized technologically in terms of communications. So there's just, more of these. When I finished text and commentary, I actually left video behind altogether. I had started, thinking about the medium in the late 60s and produced for about 10 years or so. And I wanted to see what would happen when I actually began to work at the loom. But I wasn't interested in making anything practical, and I was really interested in language. And I decided, based on a 4-point grid structure for lines, for intersections, that I would create a language. So let's say an A was in a grid structure of vertical, with 1, 2, 3, 4 in a vertical line. The top line, the top little spot, pixel, would be an A. 1 down would be a B. 3 down would be a C. 4 down would be a D. An E would be 1 and 2, an F would be 2 and 3, and so on till I finished the alphabet. At which point I decided to write the text of the Tower of Babel on a canvas, and that canvas grew into other canvases. And the reason I chose the Tower of Babel text is it was an early text about technology and human beings' relationship both to God, because you're moving away, you're in a God-centered world and moving away from a God-centered world. You're in a world where urbanization, you're moving towards a more urban environment from a more agrarian one. You're dealing with burnt bricks and bitumen, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which holds the bricks together. And it's a time of, it signifies what is our relationship to ourselves, to other human beings, and a relationship to God, and moving into a kind of new world, philosophically and religiously. This work, the Tower of Babel, this was the way the work looked on the canvas, and it's literally a translation in my language from Genesis onto this grid-structured cloth. And about 20 years later, I got curious about it again and created another work based on it, where I brought 3 languages together: the phonetic alphabet in English, the little points of that constructed the language, and into each of those. So you have actually beginning to be spelled out in the black. I could show you an A or B, but essentially it's going, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And that's pretty much what the big black things say. And then within them is kind of a description visually of people traveling from one place to another, of people worshiping bricks, of people working on the pyramids, of shadows from Egyptian wall paintings that you see of workers. And so it was a way, again, of mining the richness that I saw in language development over long periods of time. And there was a video. This particular work, which I finished. So you had the early Babel pieces in the early 1980s, and then reconstructed in 2006 in this print, which is 16 feet wide by 6 feet high, which I printed on an inkjet printer in my studio. My printer only prints 2 feet wide, so it's made up of 3 strips that were then push-pinned to the wall in exhibition. Let me see if I'll show you a tiny bit of that video. Let's see how we have time. Actually, I think I don't know if I have the time to do that. And there are a few other things I definitely would like to show you. So when I finished this, I began to collaborate with my husband, Steve Reich, on a work called The Cave, again taking the structure from text and commentary. This was, let's say, the stage. This piece was shown in 1993. The cave refers to the place on the West Bank in the town of Hebron in Israel. And it's the place where Adam and Eve is supposed to be buried, where several of the matriarchs and patriarchs are supposed to be buried. It was a place after time where Herod came and built a huge structure over these caves. And when the Christians came, they built a Byzantine structure over the caves. And when the Muslims came, they put a mosque over the caves. So given what's going on in the world, it seemed like a really interesting place for us to go. We chose it because we were interested in the subject matter, and also given the precedent of Dachau, I needed a place where I could actually go and record a spot, because that was interesting to me. And at the same time, in 3 different acts, we interviewed 3 different groups of people. In the first act, we interviewed Israeli Jews, in the second, Palestinian Muslims, and in the third, Americans. And we asked each group 5 different questions. Each group was a different act of this work, and the questions were the same, and they were essentially, who for you is Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, Ishmael, and Isaac? And we were very interested to see at that time, I mean, since that time, since 1993, everybody, mostly not for good, has had to think about a lot of the concerns having to do with religion. But in 1993, people weren't really thinking about this too much. Steve and I actually had Muslim advisors so that we didn't step on anybody's toes and have a problem. This was around the time that Salman Rushdie was having a big problem. I would like to show you a little section from Act 3 of the work. There's so much to say about the cave. I mean, technologically at that point, you see this man is Ephraim Isaac. He's actually a Jew from Yemen. And when I recorded him, he had these suspenders that you can kind of vaguely see. Photoshop was just happening and was pretty crude. I had a choice between a program called High Resolution QFX, where this guy, I think his name was Ron Scott out of Texas, was making a Photoshop-like program. And then there was Photoshop, and I kind of looked at both, and I figured that the Ron Scott thing seemed a little bit easier to use. It did a little bit more. Over the course of, and essentially what it allowed me to do was to grab a still from the video and put it back into video. And that was, huge. And I edited, there was a group out in California called Advanced Remote Technology, Inc., which allowed me fairly easily to queue up 5 decks and monitors, and with an Apple Plus, I was able to generate 5 edit decision lists at the same time and play back the tapes in my studio at the same time. So it was kind of very cutting edge, and amazingly gave a lot for that period of time in terms of what you could do. And I went from working on something like text and commentary and the grease pencil to real edit decision lists with the computer and really marking time code, and found absolutely no problem in doing it, because the interesting thing is once you've gone through the editing process, it's just the same. You spend a day realizing, okay, now it's all time coded. It's not a matter of the grease pencil saying two seconds. It's 2 seconds, how many frames, and all of that. But essentially, it's the same. And I'll show you a little section of this from the third act, which is when we came back to America, which was a relief to us in a lot of ways, because it was really where we came from, and the American reaction to the questions was quite different from the reactions in the Middle East, where everybody really knew the answer to those questions, Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, Ishmael, Isaac, and really had an opinion about that, and all the politics would come in around the edges. You would have, Ishmael in the Israeli section would be a fighter. In the Muslim section, he'd be an obedient son. In the third act, he'd be Ishmael from Moby Dick, somebody who was walking off into the sunset all by himself. So the work takes you through different cultures, and I'll show you if I can find it here. Oh, I think it's on my heart, a different place here. Yeah, I couldn't get the audio from. Sorry, so let me just find that again. Here, it's on my list C. All right, and I have to find this little thing. Okay. Whoops. All right, now I'm going to really scroll through this, so you're just going to see a lot of images going by to get you to the third act. And again, who for you is Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, Ishmael, Isaac? I'm just going to show you 4 minutes from the beginning of Act 3, when Liz Lecomte, who is the director of the Worcester Group in New York City, a very experimental theater group, answers the question. And I'm not really precise enough on this, so you'll have to just watch the very end. Oops, good. Okay.
Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln High School, high on the hilltop, mid-Salmon Sea. Lincoln High School. High on the hilltop, mid-Salmon Sea. That's about as far as I trace Abram.
If I thought of Abraham, I would think of the Abraham and Isaac story, and I'd think of Renaissance and Mannerist art.
Renaissance and Mannerist art.
Mannerist art.
Renaissance and Mannerist art. Renaissance and Mannerist art.
Mannerist art.
I have no idea.
No, I have no idea. I have no idea.
I have no idea, no idea. Who Abraham is or what he represents. Our mythology.
Mythology, our mythology.
The Bible is our mythology. The Bible. Irrelevant. Irrelevant. The Bible introduced it. Introduced and forgotten. Our mythology. In the drawer. 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 In the drawer in the hotel.
And when you read,
And when you read,
and when you read,
and when you read,
and when you
read,
read,
and when you
read,
and when you read,
and when you
read,
and when you read the Bible, it's God speaking to you, and you speak back to God in prayer.
When people say,
when people say to me,
when people say,
when people say to me,
when people say,
when people say to me,
when people say it has nothing to say to us, I think they've never read it.
Old Testament, never read it.
never read it.
Never read it. Old Testament, never read it.
The Old Testament.
Okay, so just, let me just get rid of this. Again, so this piece was for the stage. So what I just showed you is just, again, for, kind of show and tell purposes. Every time you hear a person in the course of the piece, you're listening to their voice melody notated to music, and you're looking at some part of their frame that was blown up and used as a piece of information. So essentially, you're looking always at a visual and an oral portrait of each of the people who are interviewed in the course of the work, who themselves become the characters in our opera, are the interviewees. I'm just wondering, in terms of time, do I have time to show a 10-minute piece, or, okay. There was another work, by the way, that followed, another opera that followed, that's actually going to be performed. This one was premiered in 2002. It's really about technology. We interviewed scientists from MIT and different places, people in artificial intelligence. And it becomes kind of a study of the character of different scientists, and those science is objective. The people who make science are quite different human beings. And anyway, it's going to, if any of you are in Los Angeles, at the end of May, it's going to be performed by the LA Philharmonic. This is a picture of Kismet, who is a is a robot created by a young woman, Cynthia Brazil, at the MIT labs, and Kismet sings. After I finished these two operas, I really felt like I didn't ever want to say anything ever again. And so I went through a period where I made very, very simple, completely nonverbal works with nothing in particular to say. One was watching yellow water taxis on the Hudson near my house. Let's see if I can just show you a little clip from that. And I think I'd like to, and when I did find words again, I found somebody else's words. I created 2 works. I was thinking about fear and how fear kind of debilitates us and limits us. And I was looking for people who went beyond fear in their own lives to do something remarkable. And at the time, I was taking care of 2 elderly parents. And people would kid me and say, "Oh, you're Florence Nightingale." And so I thought, oh yeah, Florence Nightingale. Who was Florence Nightingale? So I got online and found out a little bit more about her and became fascinated with her. And so this work is actually based on, I ordered a whole bunch of books from Amazon, and she had written voluminously. She had gone off in her early 30s to save men who were being slaughtered on the battlefields of the Crimean War. And she came from an upper-class British family who thought this was, absolutely the worst thing she could have ever done, not because she was in danger, but because she was supposed to be back in London entertaining people and being, a woman from a very upper-class family. And she completely turned her back on that. So I found some of her writings and took little clips here, took little clips there, and in a sense made a soliloquy of her words. And this was the result. And instead of using the weaving as a structure for actually combining information, this was really almost just making a visual structure out of material, video material, that forms its own kind of weaving structure visually, but not in terms of how the information is related to you. And this is 10 minutes. And I think we should have this light cut, because this light I realized should have been off. Yeah, okay, so let me find it. And view, enter full screen. I could say, well, the only thing I'll say about, I guess in concluding in some ways, as I was looking at this, all the work that you've seen today was done on a home computer, working alone. That's how the hand thing has come in. I've never worked with other people, other editors, anything like that. And that's kind of kept, for me, the hand in the technology thing. And thank you very much for coming. And I think if anyone wants to ask any questions, think about it, whatever, we could do that or not. Yes?
Yeah, I was really struck by that image, that early image that you showed of the foam core wall.
Right.
And I was wondering, and so that you also have the text and commentary and whatever showing it's behind, embedded into a wall too. And I was wondering if the foam core kind of pointed to the importance of that. Like if you didn't have plywood, you had to have that.
Well, I wanted a wall to give it a kind of spatial presence beyond the, to me it was almost like a tombstone or something at the time. In retrospect, I'm really glad I did it because a lot of people who tied themselves to the 4:3 monitors are having a hard time today if they made things specifically for the look of those monitors because they're not that easy to get. And when I was bemoaning the fact when I was going to show Dachau that it was going to be seen, and I didn't have 4:3 monitors, and it was beginning to get hard to get them, somebody said to me, don't tie yourself to an old technology. And fortunately, because they are hidden, I'm using flat screens now, like when it showed at the Tate last year, and the cutouts, you can take the menu and set it to 4:3. But at the time, I was just really, I can't even really remember why I was thinking, that I had to get rid of the monitors, but it just kind of gave video, at that point, it gave video something a little bit more elegant, and it cohered the four, so.
It was just striking to me since so much video-based work foregrounds the bulkiness of the monitor at that moment. They're objects, sculptural objects in space, and the wall.
Well, actually, I do remember one. I do remember. One of the things in the early days was, moving from film. So in a way, at the time, I was definitely thinking, it's kind of 8 feet by 10 feet. I was thinking of a film screen. That was one of the things. And puncturing 4 holes in it. I mean, that was one of the thoughts at the time. There were other thoughts, but that definitely was one of them. Well, thank you all for coming. Hi.